Well, this is the right place for this morning. What you're seeing on your screen is a revised day 2 agenda that takes us through noon. And part of that reason is making sure that we honor the time for public comment. Basically, two big things on the agenda. One being working on the tank's draft advice. The suggestion yesterday was to look at the advice points and assess where we are on that. And then the last piece being basically board business, checking in with the committees and any business the board needs to do, and making sure that we are here between 11:45 and 12 for public comment. One of the earlier versions of the agenda had public comment at 11:45, and I missed that change. So we will make sure that we check in with folks if they wish to make public comment. Is there anything else we need to cover today that we put on the list? Anyone?
When we talk about the agenda for March, Gary said that they were starting to rekindle the 101 briefings. It would be most interesting to know what it is that is being proposed, because I think a number of us would really like to get more understanding of how risk is used in decision making. And we've talked about that for a long time. Anyway, it's just a thought moving forward.
Steve, this is Gary, and that is one of the topics proposed for the March agenda. So we are of like mind on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it possible that they concentrate on the risk of the latest decisions about leaking tanks? Can we direct the study or the report?
It's not a report. Basically what it is, it'll be an overview of how we assess risk on projects and how we then determine priorities. So it's not for any specific item or a project. It's the overall risk process.
More of a business case. Okay.
That is correct. It's basically kind of a continuation of the Hanford 101 series, where we show processes on what it is that we're doing and why we do certain things. And with all the new members on board and risk, and Steve has spoken about risk on more than one occasion, and many of the senior leadership have talked about risk. And what we're doing is coming up with a briefing that explains what is that and how do we use that at Hanford.
Thanks for the explanation.
Rob, I'd like to come back to your point, though, when we start talking about the advice points, because I think that we ultimately need to know where single shell tanks fit in the overall risk profile.
I would agree, and it might be better if we had Bob through the Tank Waste Committee lead some of that discussion on that, because I think it's going to be more technical than advice points. I mean, we really want to understand what is leaking out of these tanks. What is it? Why are we concerned or not concerned? And we have nothing now. Is it just salt? Is it just water?
Let's come back to that when we start going through the advice.
Thanks. And thanks for, folks, thanks for being patient with me on this one. I'm going to, thanks.
They're always worth it.
All right. So I didn't mean to have you go down the rabbit hole, but I was looking at quorum and it takes a little longer online. I see hands. So Jerry and Chris, I don't know which order you went up, so.
Thank you. I was going to raise, if since we're talking about the agenda, the next meeting, that the Public Involvement Committee had discussion about the importance of beginning our board meetings with a land acknowledgement for the tribes and the ceded lands and their resources, that we are not only discussing in terms of where Hanford is, but the tank leak issue is exactly the best example of an issue that affects treaty rights that are often ignored and we forget about, and have very different impacts for the future of three nations for 10,000 years than it does for the rest of us. And so I would ask that we have 101 briefing and discussion led by the tribes on what is sovereignty, treaty rights, their history at Hanford, and the importance of and role of land acknowledgements, and what is special about the Hanford resources to their cultures. As an opening, we talked about the need for some deeper understanding before we just begin to do a land acknowledgement at the beginning of meetings, recognizing that the areas that we're not sitting on, some of us right this minute, but some people may be sitting on, and others are, we're all discussing lands and resources that were ceded as part of a formal treaty between the United States and three nations, and that they retain specific rights and have greater health effects as well as cultural effects from the decisions. So I would ask that we do 101 on that, and that we prioritize that and work with the three nations to present this. And the issue of tank leaks is a point in case of having really ignored in the discussion how this affects treaty rights to resources and their health over 10,000 years, which is different calculation than for someone like me or someone who represents local government. So I would urge us to do that as a priority. Thank you.
Great
I'd
idea.
like a response sometime.
Chris, let's go to you, and then we can move on to the draft advice. Chris?
Someone made a comment just before Jerry talked about we need to know what's leaking from the tanks. And for all the new people especially, there's quite a bit of information that's publicly available. For example, if you go to DOE.gov and then click on helpful links, you'll find something called Phoenix at the top. This is a database with an awful lot of information in it. And one of the things you can find in that database, if you mash keys long enough, is you can pull up a list of all tanks that are suspected of leaking, and you can get the inventory of a whole range of different contaminants in those tanks, with total inventories for sludge, for salt cake, and for supernatant. And for example, I took a look at B109, and that inventory was updated as of September 28th, 2021. But there's a lot of information in there. It doesn't tell you that this tank is leaking and what's in the leak, but there is a lot of information that could be helpful and useful. The other thing is, if you go into Hanford.gov and go to Richland and go to groundwater, you can get into the Heist Database. Now, the Heist Database is a database that all analytical data are entered into for soils and groundwater, and have been entered into this database for essentially 50 years. I took a look at groundwater underneath the the bee farm, and at least for the last 20, perhaps 25 years, there were no hits, no detections of cesium-137 below the bee tank farm. And that was a quick and dirty search, and I wouldn't say that was 100% accurate, but that's the kind of information you can get that might be useful in thinking about some of these topics that come up. That's it.
Okay. So the idea is to go through the advice. Emmett, I was going to have Bob sort of set up this conversation. Which piece do you want to be commenting on?
All right, I want to respond to Jerry's comment about the Native Americans and the ceded lands. I don't know if people remember BWIP or not, the Salt Waste Isolation Project, and that was on very cultural sensitive lands. And one of the things that we talked about in the public forum was the point about the Native Americans' input and how we don't get any input as far as, because there are nations and their government, considered government to government, and we don't get their input, and how their input, how does that input gel with some of the concerns we have, such as the tanks. And that's something that is missing if we're talking about the tanks and the leaking of the tanks. Well, what are their concerns? And I really believe strongly that we need to mesh those two together. Makes it a fuller position. That's thank you, and thanks for bringing that up, Jerry. That's something we don't really talk about or discuss.
So I want to move this discussion into the part of the meeting looking at the March meeting and kind of redirect us back to the draft advice. Gary, you had your hand up and now I don't see your hand.
Yes, and maybe I missed it, but did we formally open the meeting with FACA announcement and announcement that we are recording?
We haven't got there yet. So
okay.
Yes, we do record all of our Hanford Advisory Board meetings. So this meeting is being recorded and the recording will be posted on hanford.gov when Josh and Patrick work their technology magic. Stan, are you here? Can you help us with the FACA part? Okay. Gary, would you help us with the FACA
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are, Stan.
Can you hear me?
All right. Yes.
Yep. It took a while to get to do the *6 to get unmuted there. All right, I'll go ahead and kick us off. So good morning and welcome to the December 2021 Hanford Advisory Board meeting, day 2. My name is Stan Branch. I'm the Deputy Designated Federal Officer for the Hanford site. As a reminder, this meeting will be conducted in accordance with the requirements of the Federal Advisory Committee Act. Advisory committees have played an important role in shaping programs and policies of the federal government. The Hanford Advisory Board's role is to provide policy-level advice and recommendations concerning the following EM-specific issues, such as cleanup activities and environmental restoration, waste and nuclear materials management and disposition, excess facilities, future land use and long-term stewardship, risk management, and communications. I appreciate your attendance today on day 2 and in addition to day 1, and look forward to the HAB development and submission of constructive, actionable policy level advice on Hanford cleanup. Welcome again, and thank you for your attendance today. Back to you, Ruth.
All right. So I think I've triaged the technical stuff behind the scenes. We've got the FACA. We know we're being recorded. Bob Suyama, let's talk about the draft advice. I'm going to pull it up while you set the stage.
Okay. We only have little more than an hour for, well, less now.
Now,
for
we'll go a full hour. Don't worry about it.
okay, for reviewing this advice and to be able for the Tank Waste Committee to quickly and accurately reflect the feelings of the board. I think we need a plan of action that says how we're going to proceed today. If we were in a real meeting, not a virtual meeting, the first thing you would find when you walked in this morning would be a colored sheet of paper with the advice sitting at your desk. And so Ruth has that up on the screen. And the first thing you would do would be to read it. And then we would start discussing it. So from the discussions yesterday, I really got the feeling that not many people had read the new advice. This is the advice that the Tank Waste Committee worked on yesterday, or last month, and proposed, and we were starting to look at yesterday. And so I think the first thing we do is we need to make sure everybody has a chance to look at it and read it, because it's not the same advice we talked about at our last meeting. We took all the comments, we took all the input that we got, and we incorporated it. And then I'd like a straw poll, maybe go around by seat and have people say, yes, this advice is valuable. This is something that we need to go forward with, something we need to tell the tri-party agencies that we're concerned about. And so a straw poll would tell us, hey, who's supporting it and who's not. And if you are not supporting it, or if you have concerns, you should tell us what advice point needs to be rewritten or relooked at or addressed in some manner so we can fix it and get consensus advice. Because I think this advice is very important for the site in the long term. Yesterday, you heard Richard Bloom. He said that as far as he's concerned, all the tanks, the single shell tanks, have either leaked in the past, are leaking, or will leak in the future. When you think about the age of these tanks, they were built in the 60s. This is 2020 now. And by the time they're recovered in 2040 something, they're going to be almost 100-year-old. And I can't see anything after 100 years being a good barrier to protect the environment. So I think this advice is the start of a discussion that says we need a plan. And what that plan is something we need to discuss in the next hour so the Tank Waste Committee can take this back and come up with something that everybody agrees to. So with that, Ruth, I'll give it back to you and see if everybody agrees.
There were emails about this advice popping around until about 11 o'clock last night. And Steve Wigman has expressed more than once his desire to actually do round robins about advice, to engage the seats and invite everybody to say what they need to say. What if we went around the room first and got people's thoughts on the advice?
I have a thought on that. I think that When we talked yesterday about talking through the individual points of advice, I was viewing that as a real opportunity to educate ourselves as to what the issues are. Because I think we've got a lot of new members and we've got a lot of older members that may not understand the context without that conversation. So I would prefer to go through that conversation before we ask if people support it. Just my own perspective. I think that conversation is very important, and that's why I wanted the round robin on advices in the first place, was to make sure that once we get to that point, we actually have an educated board. So whatever it takes to best educate ourselves today is what I'd like to do.
Okay, so how about we go through the advice points, make sure that if people have questions or comments, we capture that. And if we do that, say between now and 10 in the 10, that's like 30 minutes. And then go around the room round robin between 10 and 10:30 and see where we land.
I think that's great. I'd also like to ask that when we talk through the points, the folks who prepared it describe what their vision is in really simple terms so that we can all understand the context. Context is going to be really important for this whole topic to be matured through the next whatever time period we deal with single shell tanks. We're going to be dealing with them for a long time. B109 and I are about the same age, and I'm starting.
All right. So Jeff Burright, I didn't warn you I was going to ask. So process, if we go point by point and you do a little bit of context for each, are you up for that adventure?
I am up for whatever you need, but I'm not the only person who prepared this advice. So if there are others who wish to speak up to explain the vision of a particular advice point, they are invited and welcome to do so.
Okay. So let's jump in. I'm trying to make this as big as I can so that those of you with trifocal eyes can handle it. Advice point 1. Jeff, why don't you kick off the Cliff Notes version and we'll open it up.
Sure. So we wanted to start the advice with a value. And in the background, we talk about the HAB values, which we have listed and we developed back in 2012 of do no harm during cleanup. But here, specific to single shell tank leakage, active leaks, we decided to start with the value that assessing the leaks in a timely manner. So understanding if they're leaking, but also what is the risk of them leaking. And then abating and responding to SST leaks. And this word abating came up during our revision. And that was, I think, a Richard word that, it could mean getting out ahead of a leak so that it never becomes a problem, or it could be stopping a leak once it begins, assuming that you have the team ready to respond. We also put in to the extent feasible. We recognize that this is not an easy thing. And it should be a policy goal of the Hanford mission. We also do talk about the need to make decisions quickly when it comes to abating harm from a leak. So don't delay it by a lengthy process. We also include a public involvement value that we want to see a formal comment opportunity on response options.
Right. Are there questions or comments on number 1 to make sure you understand what the intent is? Anyone?
And if I mischaracterize any of that, I'm just going off of what I remember from our discussions. Others who were there, please feel free.
Jan.
Good morning. So I remember some discussion yesterday about how there were a lot of words, and what I see just in point 1, it seems like there may be 3 advice points, or value discussions might be in the preamble. So we assessing leaks in a timely manner and responding or, mitigating leaks, and it must not be delayed, and a public comment opportunity. And I'm wondering if, we haven't seen all of the bullet points yet, but each one of them could be an advice point. So as I go through this, that's the kind of template I'll be putting over the paragraphs to see how many different topics are being addressed in each advice point. Thank you.
Other questions or comments about advice point 1? Right. We're glad you're back with us, Esteban. I know. I'm sorry about the technical problem. Let's go to advice point 2. Oh, Pam. I'm sorry. Pam, jump in.
Thank you. So I have an overall concern about the cost of all this. From a policy perspective, of course, this would be a wonderful path forward. But we're getting $2.4 billion. So what are you going to give up to do what you're asking for in this advice? I mean, that's a question that's going to come to us. So I think as we look at this, and maybe it's not advice point 1, but the overall, what do we need to do first? And to me, that's the development of technologies and to figure out a path forward to deal with this issue. So I don't know if that should be advice 2 or where it should be in terms of our priorities. But first of all, we got to figure out how to deal with it. And we don't know how to deal with it yet because we don't have good technical analysis and technology in place. So that's where I'm coming from, is the financial implications of this. So, and would DOE headquarters support what we're asking for if we go full tilt boogie, do it now, you're harming the environment? Or can we look at an incremental approach? So thank you.
I have Rob and Jerry. Rob?
Yes. I think we have a couple issues here that one is the length of time. Okay. And let's face it, any tank farm manager in the United States of America is bound to not have their product leak out to the environment. It's just natural. And yet we're allowing it to be done. But the timing is definitely one thing. But I do think, though, from listening to Pam right there, I think Pam is kind of saying the same thing we're saying, but we need to speed it up. And if truly the risk is low and we can afford the time to let another tank leak before we finally end up with a way of doing it, we still have hundreds left. So can we combine these together? I think it's a value of us as the board that we manage our waste properly, and letting it leak is not. And that's what this is all about, I think, is that on one hand, we recognize you gotta get some advanced things because you just can't go digging out in radioactive land and expect it to really get anything unless you get a plan and a budget with it and all those kind of activities. It's not just going to come off of overhead. So I think that what we want really is a more organized approach to addressing these, and how to find the funds. If you end up with a third and a fourth leak in the next 2 months, just how are we going to do it? And so I like it saying that it's a value of us to do this in a timely manner, and then cleaning up the mess if it's possible, or somehow justify it. So I don't think Pam's that far off from what we're saying in the rest of this process. So I'll end it there. I only got a couple of minutes.
All right, Jerry.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't speak for the IM team as a whole, but I know from my perspective, Pam, I thought we felt like you had made some really good points about both budget and timing as we revised the advice. And I believe we all thought that it was inherent in bullet number 3, the feasibility assessment, that it would include timing and cost and budget. And it obviously, we let you down, and I apologize for that as one of the crafters. And I believe that in bullet number 3, what we should do is specify with a new sentence that the feasibility assessment must include both, it's not both, it's costs, budget profile, and timeline for the alternatives. And I hope that that would address your concern, which I think we all agreed with, and we thought that we were incorporating into the advice by calling for a feasibility assessment in bullet number 3. And I hope that that would address this, because none of us want to do something that is a budget buster. And one of the things we're assessing is that, and it's referred to in the background, that there was a December 2020 letter from Ecology, and there was a prior report on which it's based that said enhanced salt well pumping was feasible, cost effective, and could be done fairly timely. So we want that expanded upon and more work done and report and shared back to us. And so if we could add that language of the feasibility assessment should include cost, budget profile, and timeline, I think I would hope that that would meet your concern, because none of us want to do something without knowing those things.
That would
Separately,
be helpful.
oh, that'd be great. And I think we really heard you, and we thought it was inherent in the words feasibility assessment from the discussion. And obviously, sometimes this is what happens when I know we had it in there in one draft and we were cutting words. And that is what happens as we cut. I also have put in the chat a link to PowerPoint presentation that the Tank Waste Committee saw, and which was then updated after a review by Ecology as well. And it includes on slide number 20 and 21, the borehole gamma logging, the logging of gamma radiation below the tank. That was the definitive proof on the south side that the tank is leaking on the south side. And you should see the graph for yourself. I wish we could put it up here. And people on Tank Waste Committee and IM team saw this. It shows that the level of gamma radiation at the south side of the tank in the prior gamma borehole logging a decade or more ago, there was no elevated contamination different from anywhere else in the tank farm. Now, in April of 2021, you see the gamma borehole logging the results are so high that and so elevated between 40 and 60 feet below the bottom of the tank, below the surface of the top of the tank, that the instrumentation can't even log how high the gamma radiation is from the tank leak. And you see that the edge of the leak has reached 65 feet below surface and groundwater is about 200 feet. And it's worth looking at that PowerPoint presentation and the slide because it's not something that you're going to see on DOE or anyone else's website. And it's right out of having dug through the reports and the Phoenix data. And we've graphed the Phoenix data showing the loss of liquid. And again, that was viewed by the Tank Waste Committee.
right, I have Chris, Jeff, why don't you, Chris, if you could hold on a minute for Jeff to jump in with a suggestion, and we'll go back to you, okay?
Okay.
Jeff?
I have a draft of the advice open on my machine, and I'm taking notes as I'm hearing what people are saying. Would it be helpful to show that on the screen instead?
Cool.
If you don't mind me driving.
I love it when you do that.
All right.
It helps me manage the other two screens I've got.
Wait a minute. Are you going to be texting and driving at the same time, Jeff?
Would you describe gamma radiation for those non-rad folks?
Jerry, let's get you off of mute.
Thank you. Maybe I should defer to someone else on that, but there are 3 types of radiation. Gamma is the radiation that is most penetrative, and therefore most easily logged through the soil column. The gamma borehole logging that they did not differentiate between different radionuclides, but that can be done fairly easily with different type of borehole measurement. So cesium, for example, is a major emitter of gamma radiation, and but we don't know which specific radionuclides are the gamma emitters in the leak right now, but we can make some assumptions based on the tank contents. Is that adequate?
That helps, yes, thank you. Well, let's see if a new member wants to say that helps. Certainly helped me.
All right, so I have Chris. Steve, is your hand still up, or was that your thing?
It's down.
It's down. Okay. Chris, and then Tony Brooks. Chris.
Right. I just want to point out that in point number 1, first couple sentences, first couple lines indicate timely manner. Then you say leaks must not be delayed by lengthy processes. But then when you go to point number 3 and you talk about feasibility assessments, feasibility assessment is going to be a lengthy process. That's not something that's going to happen very quickly, especially if you add things like cost and baseline and schedule and so on and so forth. So I think there's a bit of a contradiction there. If you want something done quickly, that's not going to happen if you have a feasibility assessment before you do something.
I don't know how to get in queue. Can I respond straight to that, Chris?
Yeah, jump in there.
You make a good point that if we had to do a feasibility assessment every single time a tank leaked, then yes, that would represent a time requirement on it. I think the vision here was that if you do a feasibility assessment at the front end and use that to then inform the plan, that you aren't doing that every single time. And so it's kind of a one-time time cost, if you will.
Okay, maybe you could add a couple clarifying words to that then, so that someone doesn't, other readers don't think the same thing I did.
Okay.
So I have Tony and Richard in queue. Tony?
Just a response to Jerry there. I've looked over the biology of all of these radionuclides. Technetium 99, iodine 129, strontium 90, the alpha emitters. The only gamma emitter in the tank basically is cesium. So if you're getting gammas, it's cesium that's leaking, it's cesium that's moving. So just as a clarification there.
Thank you, Tony. Richard?
Yes, I hope you can hear me. I was in the wrong meeting, so I missed the beginning of this. But I guess I want to stress one thing: a feasibility study, a risk assessment. A lot of these things are not, they don't get any work done. They basically say, gee, we might be able to do something, or let's. I still support 2, and 5. They actually try and get some work done in the field. Only 10% of the workers at Hanford actually do any work in the field, actually accomplish everything. Everybody else moves around and does the paper. And so I just want to come back and emphasize that if the HAB really wants to focus on actually mitigating the problem, tell DOE to go mitigate the problem, not to go study the problem. So I think I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
David, reblog. See your hand. You have the floor.
All right, thank you. Just a couple, I guess, reflections from the conversation yesterday and then what we're discussing today. I know there was some conversation yesterday about, is the time right for the HAB to give advice, since the DPA agencies are discussing this situation right now as well. And if I remember correctly, the HAB is on the record in giving advice, encouraging DOE to have sort of a plan in place should tanks be found to be leaking, or to be working to develop that plan. So to some level, maybe that's already been on the record for the HAB. But I do feel like there might be some value in waiting to hear what the agencies agree upon for a path forward. That being said, I do feel like there might be a sort of narrow focus where the advice now could be useful and timely. And for me, advice points 2 and 3 would, I think, be useful and timely, perhaps 5 as well, or there's some iteration of number 5. But I don't know if we should get too broad or too prescriptive at this point until we know a little bit more about where the TPA agencies are at. But I'd also like to remind folks that, in my mind at least, the real solution to all of this is we got to get that waste permanently out of the tanks and treated. That is as we all know, that's the end goal. And so anything that could potentially distract or take away resources from that larger goal, we need to be really careful about. And I do agree with Pam's point that that unfortunately, we aren't in a position where there are unlimited resources. We have an incredible amount of resources compared to the rest of the complex and the overall EM budget, but it is a zero-sum game. And so looking at salt well pumping and whether or not you can incorporate that with TBI, to me, I think that makes sense. And in my conversation with Jerry before, it doesn't seem like it's at this point a particularly expensive thing to pursue. But again, I think we need to be very cognizant of not giving advice and asking for work to be done that would, in the long term, detract from the end goal, which is permanently getting out the waste out of the tanks and permanently negating that risk. So that's all I have.
Steve Wigman.
Following up on that just a little bit, would it be worth including some discussion of accelerating tank retrieval? I know in the system plan, tank retrieval is, for the single shell tanks, is way out there. B109 and an I will both be 100 years old when it gets retrieved. And we have, I don't think maybe there's something in the system plan, I don't know, but I don't think there's anything in the system plan regarding interim actions to prevent leaks. I think many of us were not surprised by the Purex tunnel collapse. We're not surprised that tanks are leaking. Should we in some way begin to interact with the idea of accelerating retrieval of the waste and closure of the tanks? And I mean closure of the tanks, not leaving them there until they collapse. I'm not directing that. I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to begin that kind of conversation.
Jerry?
Steve, in the development of the advice bullet number 4, the leak mitigation plan, I think is envisioned as looking at which tanks are of the greatest risk for leakage and what actions can be taken. So not just taking action when you have a leak, but is what can be done. And this is, having an assessment of what can be deployed is one thing when you have a leak. Second step is a leak mitigation plan, which belongs in the permit. And you heard, I think in September, I think David Bowen said, he had been surprised that there wasn't a permit requirement for a leak mitigation plan and response plan. And many of us have been surprised by that. And that is something that would take more time. And I think we're calling for that. And the bigger picture, though, is a discussion about ultimately, can we accelerate removal of wastes, as you're suggesting, from more tanks than in the current plan in the next 25, 30 years? And that would require the supplemental treatment discussion. And I think that as a huge policy matter, we have to be engaged in that on a separate track. And people should look, and I am surprised that I read in the GAO report the official comments of the state of Washington to the report released last week by the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO, to Congress, that Ecology said we don't need to look at supplemental treatment until between the years 2040 to 2050. And I believe that's a quote, 2040 to 2050. If we want to do what you're suggesting, I think we should be looking at advice about accelerating that, because if you have supplemental treatment online much earlier, of course, you could empty more tanks sooner. But I think that is a different policy question than the leak mitigation plan.
Okay. I think you and I are of similar mind on this topic, so I would entertain the discussion going forward to try to get some acceleration and supplemental treatment online quicker. So, okay, I'm good.
I've got Chris and Liz and
Sorry, and I agree. I have to say, hey.
You're catching on, Esteban. You're catching on. Chris.
I agree with both Stephen and Jerry here. I think that if a tank is suspected of leaking, that it would be great if that tank could have priority for having the waste moved and treated in DF law. I don't know whether the infrastructure that's planned right now allows for such flexibility, but if you could have that flexibility, I think it would be great to treat the waste in a tank that's suspected, or if there's evidence of leaking, and get it out right then and there as soon as we're in hot operations.
Liz.
Thanks. Just on the grout supplemental treatment front, because I know it's going to keep coming up. Hanford Challenge is not excited about the extreme enthusiasm that is around the grout conversation and supplemental treatment. So just putting it out there, like that's not something we're going to support in advice to accelerate supplemental treatment, especially with, we still haven't gotten glass making, and we haven't seen it yet. So let's get glass. And I'm hopeful that as technology improves, that there might be there is the theory out there that we might not need supplemental treatment at all. So why would we accelerate it if we might not need it? That seems like a huge waste of money. So anyway, I think we need a lot more discussion about that before we even start talking about putting any advice together. And I don't think that's news, but just putting it out there so that I think we have an issue manager team looking at this, and probably we'll have some issue manager calls in the next month. So let's get that on the books so we can talk. Even if we don't agree, I think the conversation is really important, because I think we do agree on a lot of things. It's just how to get it done that there's some disagreement, and especially around assumptions about what can be done, cost savings, what that means. There's so many things to talk through, and we just haven't had the space to do it. So just putting it out there. I appreciate hearing the thoughts, but just want to put that out there. Thanks.
All right, Steve, I saw your hand, but it came down. Are you in queue?
I believe that the reality truly is that if we don't accelerate retrieval of single shell tanks, closure of them, total closure of them, we will have a legacy that we'll be still arguing about for a long time. And I know that what I would do when the first tank collapses, I'd fill them all with grout. And that's not necessarily the optimum path. I think the optimum path would be to accelerate retrieval. So we'll keep this conversation going, but I think, like Jerry said, that's kind of another topic, but these topics are going to all blend together at some point. And if we wait 25 years before we actually think about supplemental treatment, we will be 25 years worse off.
I don't have a hand to raise because I'm on the phone. This is Bob Thompson. Could I offer a quick comment?
Yeah, jump in, Bob.
You know, you're worried about leakage from a single shell tank, and there's always reason to worry. You know, as 54 million gallons of liquid nuclear waste sits out there, sometimes I think our priorities maybe are not aligned with what a real problem is. When it comes to supplemental treatment, it's not as if there's enough money in the world to continue on the glass log project, nor does the current plan actually take care of the vast amount of the liquid waste. GAO issued its report yesterday on this issue, again suggesting the need to consider the idea of grout. And so I think economics are going to drive a little bit of this. And just for the education of the board, I think people from the Hanford site think that they're, I don't know, very strong in their ability to continue to get funding. I'm watching South Carolina and Oak Ridge and Las Alamos clean up their sites. And as those sites get cleaned up, the political clout to continue to fund Hanford, not only at its current rate, but what may actually be necessary to clean the site up is going to diminish. And so, look, there are people that have vested interest in not having grout. The Department of Ecology, State of Washington, Heart of America, I understand where their heart lies. But I ask from a local community perspective, the truth is the local community is the ones that have to cover the risk. And risk is defined not only by what it is, but the length of time that you have it. And so there are some technical questions in regards to grout that need to be addressed to the satisfaction of the Department of Ecology. My observation is we're relying on 80s technology to make decisions, and things have changed substantially from then. And so it's a pretty simple question. I'm going to throw this out to the board. You may or may not like it. Let's assume we had the ability to take out 90% of liquid waste, put it in a form where it is more secure than how it currently is. You wouldn't have leaking tanks. You could do that 30 cents on the dollar and do it in a third the time. From a citizen's perspective who lives here, it's difficult to ascertain a different argument. You know, the idea when the tri-party agreement came, we're going to clean this stuff up, we're going to put it in as good a glass form and move it off-site. Well, the truth is, there's no place to move it, is there? And so if I could take liquid nuclear waste and put it in a stable form, whatever it is, not liquid, my safety for my community goes up drastically. Maybe there's not enough money for everybody who wants to make money on it, But from a community risk assessment perspective, any sane person would do that. And frankly, the arguments on the other side are hollow at best. So those are my comments. Sometimes we spend a lot of time. My observation, not only what it was 3 weeks ago I listened to, we could have concerns about things that in the big scheme of things aren't the biggest concern we should have. That's my observation. I think we forget the 800-pound gorilla, which is the big risk assessment from my perspective, and dilly-dally talking about the wrong things. We can agree or disagree on the idea of grouting, but you better have some pretty significant facts because, again, it is my community who faces the risk. And so those are my comments, and I don't know, you make advice, but understand the advice you give is not only has to be based somewhat in reality, and economic theory comes into play. But when you take money out of current projects, there's an opportunity cost, isn't there? So every dollar that goes from one place is a dollar that's less going somewhere else. And so when we consider advice, I think it's crucial that we consider all those factors. Otherwise, I think you get lost in the noise because the advice you give really is meaningless. Those are my comments.
So let me do a time check. No agenda survives first encounter with the group, and today is no different. We had originally thought to go through the 8 advice points and then do a round robin. We're into a really interesting discussion. So, and I've got 4 people in queue. Do you want to go back to going through the advice points, which was the original thought, or do you want to continue this conversation as folks are jumping in with a broader range of topics related to tanks?
This is Bob. I'd like to get through the advice points because this is the next action that we have to happen. The grout discussion is excellent. There is an IM team looking at grout, and grout is such a big area that we haven't made progress on it because there's so many options. So maybe we should have a more detailed grout discussion in the future, or maybe move it to the Tank Waste Committee. But for this advice, I'd like to focus on the advice points.
Okay, so checking back in with Rob, Jacob, Tony, and Dan. Are your comments on the advice points, or are they on this other emerging conversation?
No, the advice points. The emerging conversation is very interesting, but the advice points is what we're going to focus on. I might suggest that we separate, or look at the advice. We have things to tackle the problems now, and then things that look for better ways of tackling the problem. And because we do have a way of tackling the problem now, and we shouldn't be sitting idle. The issues about tanks is that, people talk about budgets, but again, what if some of the worst scenarios happen here? Where is DOE going to find the money to handle that? I mean, we need to do it preventively. We need to have these, I can imagine somebody calling them a Keystone Cops, but we need to have the ability to mobilize something relatively fast to do the intelligence, figure out the leakage and what's going on, to make the assessments and what technique to use. And so we have stuff that we can do now and the stuff we need to study and make better and improve. And I think that we can combine those in this advice.
Right. Jacob, are you on the advice points?
On the advice.
Can we hug your mic a little bit? We missed what you said.
Okay, yeah, I do want to talk about the advice points. So we've had some people concerned about the timing of this advice, and I don't have real strong opinions on that, but I thought I wanted to express why I am in favor of this advice, because I'm more or less agree with DOE. Their options to deal with it isn't very, very good. but what I heard when they presented to us felt like they didn't care. It wasn't that big of a deal to them. It's not a big deal. We have lots of contamination. What's a little bit more? And to me, I didn't see it that way. And it seemed like there was a lot of other people that didn't see it that way. And so I really wanted a forum to express that this is actually a big deal. And so that's kind of why I wanted this advice to come sooner or later, so that DOE could recognize that that's the values of a lot of our community. In terms of some of the individual advice points, you know, I am accepting of all of them. There's some of them that if it was just Jake in his closet writing this advice, probably half of them would go away. But I'm okay with all of them. But that was just my kind of point with the timing, is that I'd like them to know sooner or later that we think allowing tanks to leak is not a great idea.
Right. Tony, are you on the advice points?
Yes, I'm on advice point number 1. The sentence action to abate the harm from the leak must not be delayed by a lengthy process. The harm from the leak will be a lengthy process. We're not sure that the doses will be high enough to cause any harm. I think that the doses that you calculate and the risk assessment that you do will show you that the leaks are way, 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 way below the natural background level. So I think that maybe even just putting a word like the potential harm or something like that, because we don't know if there will be any harm from the leaks. If there is harm from the leaks, it will not be immediate. It will be 100 years from now. Okay? So anyway, that's just a concern of mine, that we're trying to use harm from the leaks to scare people into doing things that may not be needed. Thank you.
Right. So we've had some folks join us. We're going through the advice points and getting folks comments and questions about that. Jeff Burright has the screen and is capturing ideas as we go along. I have Dan Solitz and Pam in queue. Dan?
Good morning. This is on the advice points. The technical readiness level of the grout is not quite there yet, and we won't know until after the test bed initiative has been completed whether or not that the technical the grout is ready to go. So we've got tanks. We know they're going to leak. We got leaking tanks now. We need to get set up to deal with that, and anything that moves that process forward, I think, is worthy, because the tank leaks are going to increase. They're going to get worse. And we're just leaving a legacy that's going to be a great deal more expensive to clean up in the dirt than it would be if we got it right outside the tanks. So we need to proceed on this.
Thank you. Pam?
Thank you. I think there's been a lot of positive conversation, but differences of opinion. And I really think this needs to go back to committee with the input from today to come back and to come back for the full HAB again. And maybe we send out the revised draft for more input before the next HAB meeting, so that we can take some steps in the right direction. So I think that's important. And on grout, I mean, I don't necessarily support just pouring grout into the tanks from the top, but there are people that are thinking about that in Washington, D.C. So I think it's important for us to look at grout, the testbed initiative, as a first step, rather than pouring grout into the tanks. I'm not sure that's in this advice, but anyway, it needs to go back to committee. Thank you.
Shall we move to advice point 2? Steve Wigman, help us out here.
I have a thought that, we're trying to develop consensus advice on a topic that is so big that I think that if we go all the way to consensus, we might lose some of the perspectives that are being expressed. And so I would like the group to consider allowing a component of this advice to express the variation of views that we've heard this morning. I think that Mr. Thompson had some good thoughts on local perspective, and Tony has good ideas about what the actual risk might be. So I think we should consider acknowledging that there's a lot of different perspectives. Not to say we shouldn't have advice points, but I think we also need to capture the fact that there are various views, because you could easily get into a position where you never reach consensus. And I personally have some very strong views that I've kind of expressed and not expressed, but just a thought. Consensus sometimes kind of mows the grass to where it all looks the same. So let's be careful. That's all.
So for our newer members, advice is not the only product that the Hanford Advisory Board can produce. There are white papers, there are letters, there's draft advice. There's also something called a sounding board that has been done when the group knows their divergent opinions, but they want to express input on a particular topic. And it can be something as contentious as the fast flux test facility, or something like this. So it is possible at a board meeting to deliberately choreograph going around the room so people can share those views. So you've got multiple options. I've got Tom, Cecilia, and Liz. Tom.
I just, in this conversation we had today, I haven't heard anyone object to the idea of the bullets. There have been some clarifying comments needed. But before we send this back to committee, which, you know, I'm not on the committee, so don't have a part in that. We should really clarify for the IM team which of these advice points do not have consensus. And if none of the advice points do not have consensus, then we have consensus with some clarification. And that is pretty low-hanging fruit to put those clarifying statements in.
Liz.
Yeah, I agree with Tom. It sounds like we're talking more around peripheral issues than actually disagreeing on some of these specific points. And that will help the issue manager team when we're working through. Great, we just heard all of this great conversation. We heard some concerns around budget and spending. That seems to be the biggest concern I've heard today, which I think that's an easy thing to address, and make sure the specific language in here reflects that. And maybe there's a way we can use the chat and just say, bullet point 1, if you have an issue with this key point here about, to put it in the chat, and then we can kind of get through each advice point and know if there's someone just not speaking up. But I agree. I just don't hear crazy disagreement. Thanks.
We have 8 people on the phone, so the chat is a difficult thing to engage them. I want to make sure that we're aware of that. Jan.
Thank you. I don't have specific arguments with the advice points. I think that as a part of the consensus process that we will eventually kind of maybe narrow this down into the points that we really want to go forward. My sense is there's so much in each advice point that it's hard to get to the point for each advice point. And that's why it doesn't pay for me to disagree with everyone. So I'm kind of in the process of trying to write a note in the email about what I think would be a better organization for the draft. And I think that everyone has some, everybody has some kind of commitment to certain parts of each one of the advice points that they want to promote. But I think that we need to decide how we're going to write the advice. If the advice is going to be that we want them to mitigate the leaks, we're going to have to really narrow this down in some way. And instead, what we're doing is talking about feasibility studies and agility and enhancement and additional analysis. And I think that that's going to only get people bogged down when it comes time to reach consensus. So nobody is doubting that a lot of work has gone into this, but we need to like have a focus about what this advice wants to do to the agencies that it will be directed to. And like I say, I'm trying to write an email that I think will at least speak those things in a way that somebody could look at. And I think that we're just, you know, even kind of wandering off into grout. Do you know what I mean? It's like so much. There's so much here that we can't get these advice points are going to be points are going to be ferried out to different people on the staff when it gets to the agencies. And so we have to have it focused enough so that people can give a response to the concern or the issue. Thank you.
Esteban.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I like the comment that was made about looking at my notes here, the tri-party agreement and the whole risk factor. I know there's risk because it's nuclear waste. And I apologize to Jeff for calling him the Oregon guy. I just forgot I met like 30 people within the past 2 weeks. To me, the big thing that I think I know there's risk, there's funding's been mentioned, and the big thing that to me that also kind of stands out is that still that the AP administrator for the region hasn't been mentioned. And to me, I think the biggest message is, and then for the funding purposes, and I think it's been mentioned that this is a site that I think needs to start establishing, what it's needed, right? And the government needs to know that federal, local agencies like ecology, I think, in working with state agencies, which is not, sometimes not efficient, and then the bureaucracy gets involved. But that's where I think at the moment we don't need to lose sight about, because also that the technology might not be there, but like, and the thing that I like that I was saying, and as a field person, which is true, like I can't remember the person I mentioned, and it's like 10 people do the field work. So guess what? It's not like we have everybody doing it, and it's going to become a bureaucratic process that's going to stall. And at this point, I know funding is a worry, but like I said, to me, I mean, if there's no EP administrator, and then I think, why don't you have these federal agencies and then coordinate? Especially, I think we got a governor who supports a clean initiative and environmental justice and doing what's great with climate. But why is it? How can we not be conscious of that? This is trying to establish this area as a itself. I know we're trying to compare ourselves to others, but the big thing to me also, why I tell folks, and especially me learning, being kind of the 3 years here in Washington State, that just within this state, Eastern and Western Washington are completely different areas. And sometimes people in the East don't get what people in the West don't get what people in the East are going through. But at this point, I think you just need to get federal agencies to come and visit and have that talk, that this site needs specific funding for this, and that the technology is not there. And how are we going to go about this cleanup, especially try to move forward? And I think, like Jeff mentioned, we provided enough input, and I think the board with Bob and the tank waste committee to be, self-aware of the risk and what's happening, but yet because I think, I don't know, Steve can comment on it, but how long has work been stalled on trying to get anything done for this, especially with nuclear waste?
Jan, are you still in queue?
I don't think so.
Yeah, her hand went down and then went up, so I didn't want to misread that. So I'm looking at the time. We talked about spending an hour talking about this. We're coming up on that. I'm hearing a general sense of send the advice back to the committee and the IM team. Seems to me that there are kind of three options. So I'm just going to throw them out there and see kind of how it hits. We can send out the draft advice and ask people to give comments back to the committee and the IM team over the next 2 to 3 weeks, knowing it's holiday season. Alternative 2, you can simply send this back to the committee as is with the contents of this discussion for the committee and the IM team to work on. Option number 3 would be juggling your agenda again and taking a break and then doing a round robin, Wigman style, to check in with all the seats on the advice as it stands now. And then we can juggle the board business and the committee requests. What path would you like to take?
This is Bob. I think a round robin would give us a lot of information on what advice points people may want to have the IMT work on. I think that would be very useful. And if Steve thinks we have the time, I would recommend that.
Tom, Cecilia, you're in queue.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if we have a quorum and we do the round robin, if there's a seat that says that is not willing to provide consensus, then if they speak up. But if we have a quorum and the round robin doesn't have anyone object, we also have an option 4, which is to pass this with some modification if the round robin doesn't have anyone blocking consensus.
Right. We do have a quorum. Steve Wigman.
I would block consensus. Just so you know, I'm not ready.
Right.
Well, that's a horse of a different color.
And I told you why yesterday.
Okay. So we could, because in the rework, the original agenda had like maybe 30 minutes for committee requests, which is why it was called committee requests and not committee updates, because we haven't ever done committee updates in 30 minutes. I expanded that in this revised agenda because we had a little more elbow room. We can substitute the round robin for the committee requests and do sort of board business and committee requests at the very end. That spacing should work. We can focus the round robin on a specific question around what advice points do you support including in the advice. So there's some specific direction back to the committee. And I think we should take a break before we do that. Jerry, I see your hand. Jerry?
Well,
there you go.
I want to point out that our process would normally be doing a round robin and seeing if we have consensus, I think, as Tom has spoken about. And that consensus sometimes does not include allows 1 or 2 people to object. As you already accommodated my schedule, I have a legislative meeting at 11. we strongly favor this and believe that the public expects this board after a year basically to have offered some advice about responding to a leak, and the policy issues of responding to leaks that are staring us in the eye down the road. So I think that we should be going through, and I'm sorry, Steve, that the discussion hasn't moved you to say that there are advice principles that you would see go forward. But I think that if our process is we should be testing and seeing if we have agreement on 5 out of 6 principles. I mean, it's incumbent upon people to say if they agree to some but not others if they're objecting. And it's also possible for us to adopt advice and say that there's a minority of 2 or 3 people who disagreed and can adopt a report saying so. But I think we need to go through the process in order to determine that.
Jan.
Which Dan?
Oh, Jan Cottrell. I see her hand. You mean to put up your hand, Jan?
Okay, I was muted, sorry. So I think that this advice needs more work. I think it could be reorganized in a way.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jan.
So I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are. I apologize.
Okay, my mistake, but I will begin for the 3rd time. I think that this advice needs more work. I think it could be more concise by combining the various concepts. And I have a recommendation about how that could be done. I think it would be hasty in a way to try to get to consensus, not only because there are people that don't have that approach at this point, but also because this is not our regular way of working up advice. So, we've already missed the day yesterday when we might have done that kind of editing or talking about it. And so we pushed it to today, and really no changes have been made. Plus, people want to vote on it now. So I think that if we want to affirm our own procedures, I think it would be best to go back and work on it a little bit more. Maybe there's a way to do that where people can come with a consensus more readily in sight than it is right now, and that we'll have a better product for it. So thank you.
If you want to join the IM team, I know of no reason you can't. If you want to jump in, let Bob Suyama know that.
Sure. I'd be willing to look at the construction of the advice. I'm not a subject matter expert by any means, but I can tell that this has it could be clearer. It could be much clearer.
So I think Chris Sutton had also indicated a desire to help. So Bob, your recruiting efforts are working. My suggestion is we take a break till 10:45, and then we do the round robin with a specific focus on the advice points. And we will juggle board business and public comment at the end of the meeting. Is that acceptable plan?
Sure.
All right.
Sounds good.
Go stretch your legs. So I will confess, I just sort of unilaterally muted everybody everybody to clear out any background noise that we may have. The challenges of working in home offices and elsewhere. So Bob Suyama, are you back with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. So what I'm going to suggest, I think we have a quorum of about 20 seats represented. I didn't redo the quorum at break, but I think we're in that range. There are 36 seats on the board right now. My proposal is to literally just go down the list seat by seat. I know for some seats, we have both the primary and the alternate with us. So the seat by seat means both the primary and the alternate are welcome to share their thoughts, because we're not looking to have consensus right now. This isn't the vote thing. So seat by seat is just a way to organize it. The question I want you to answer is, which of the 8 advice points want to keep in the advice? It can be either conceptually you want to keep them in, or you love the wording. Either way, what of the 8 advice points do you want to keep and retain in the advice? Does that work, Bob?
Yes, that sounds good. And if you think certain ones need to be combined, let us know that too.
And I'm going to start from the bottom of the list this time, just to be a little different. The bottom of the list of my list is the public at large seats. And then we'll go through the public interest groups and up through our cities and counties. So is Loanne Ayers with us? All right. Esteban, what do you think?
Well, it seems people want to send it back to some committee or something, but I don't know. I think if that's the consensus, I don't know. Like Tom said that when Steve said he was going to object to something, to the consensus vote, that just kind of painted things differently. So I don't know how the rules and regulations of there's consensus. I think Ruth, you mentioned it, right?
So what of the advice points would you like to see included in the advice?
Can you share the screen again? Because I was trying to look for them in my notes and I couldn't find them.
Happy to do that.
I'll vote on number 2.
Okay. I'll move it down a little bit.
I think especially because, like I said, it points out that hopefully federal and state agencies are communicating and applying some common sense regarding this technology and what's trying to happen with the waste, right, and the grouting situation, that people don't feel so safe, or risk has been really taken into consideration for that.
All right. Thank you, Esteban. Is Martin Valdez with us? Robert Waldher, I saw you sign in earlier. What do you think?
Yes, good morning. So I was looking through the different points. One question I've been asking myself is what are the costs associated with this work? And then what are the costs of doing nothing or delaying the work? And I don't just mean the financial cost of that. And for me, it's difficult because I don't have that context as a new member. Reading the background information, like I said yesterday, I felt like it did a good job explaining the issue. After reading that, it seems like it is a very serious issue. But it is difficult to sign on to something where I don't know the full context. If you're asking for points that I could get behind, I think number 3 is one. Like I said, I need more context on the cost of this. If we were to, go in and do the cleanup or address the B109 tank currently or immediately, I need more context on what that's going to cost. So I think 3 provides a little bit of that direction. And then also I support number 5. Again, just to help, I think it recognizes that it's an important issue to us. And I think it would, I don't know, those are the 2 that I so far I think we should support.
All right, thank you. So what we're doing is we're going to go around and hit all the seats. And if you have a primary and an alternate member here from your seat, everybody gets to participate. So that's the queue is the membership list right now. David Diaz, are you with us? Tony Hedges or Linnea Williams? Chris Sutton. Let's get you off of mute and find out what you think. Chris, did you freeze up?
Okay, my unmute wasn't unmute.
Oh.
I support number 1 with the last sentence. Support the first sentence. Can you hear me?
Can you say that again? You faded out just a bit. Are you there, Chris?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I support number 1 with the exception of the last sentence. I support number 3, the first sentence expanded to get as much information as we can in a timely fashion. I support number 4. I support the first sentence in number 5 about greater agility and flexibility. I support number 8. I think some of the others could be rolled into the plan.
Thank you. Now, for those of you who can't write as fast as some of us talk, remember there's both a transcript and a recording of this. So we're not losing what people are saying. The next public at large seat is shared by Steve Wigman and Larry Haler. So we want to check in with both of them. Steve?
Yes, thank you. I generally support the context of all of the advice points. My issue is that I understand agencies are currently discussing essentially all of these same points, and I simply want to know the results of their conversation. We were not invited to participate in that conversation, and we have all accepted the fact that this regulatory process is how the tanks are managed, whether we like that or not. And I just want to wait until we see what they have to say, which I think sounds like it's pretty imminent.
Larry Haler, are you with us? I don't see you on the list. Not all of the public at large seats have an alternate. Susan Coleman, are you with us?
I am. I kind of agreeing with Steve Wigman and with Pam Larson. Having worked with DOE in the past, I'm concerned about the number of documents that we're advising them to produce. And so to me, I'm concerned about the cost implications of preparing these products, getting in the way of getting work done on the site. So I'd like a relook at all of the advising documents, products, and kind of go, is this really necessary today? And kind of go back into that the conversation we had earlier about what do we need today versus what can be done in the future. And what are they doing today? Are they doing some of this stuff? So I don't have a specific advice number. Mine is more of a holistic, overarching concern.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go seat by seat now. The public at large seats are a little different. Do we have anyone here from Washington State University? How about the University of Washington? I thought I saw Jessica at one point. Are you still with us, Jessica? Oregon Department of Energy. Max, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, everybody. Well, look, I guess Oregon supports the advice. Like Jeff was on the IM team and presented today and yesterday. So we support the concept of the advice. I'm also a new member, so I'm coming in this with a few questions here. Question I would ask on point number three is it's sort of an interesting advice point to make. We're saying this is an advice from the agency, but in order to make better advice or good advice, we need more information. Is that something that is typically put in an advice point to request more information, or is that something that I think Steve Wigman mentioned it, we really could get more information from the agencies, from DOE specifically, outside of the context of this advice, and use that information in order to form our own better advice? That seems like sort of one question I'd have, and maybe that's sort of for the my own knowledge as much as anything on this advice. It was just sort of just kind of a phrasing that makes me think, well, maybe there's a way to extract that information request, put that out to the agencies, get a response, and then further develop our own advice. So that was my first point. The other questions that I might raise are really sort of looking at the advice. Yeah, people have said it's kind of lengthy and things, and maybe it does, but a lot of it seems important and comprehensive and trying to be specific as to what the board is looking for. And really, when I look at the advice points 1 through 8, number 4 strikes out to me as that's if I'm reading this, that seems like the big thing, right? A formal leak mitigation plan for the single shell tanks. Many of the other points seem like they would be specific requests of what would be included in that leak mitigation plan. And that to me seems like they're sort of advice that might come under the leak mitigation plan. And so maybe there's a way to make the advice more straightforward if that's sort of if it's a question from the board as to that the advice seems sort of lengthy and includes a lot of requests for information. When I read this, really it's about number 4. And then there are specific requests as to what that plan should include that would roll up under that number 4. All right, So that's kind of a long way to say that Oregon, my perspective right now is, I think there's a need to have a response plan to leaking tanks. What exactly that looks like, well, we have some ideas here, but also I think we're admitting in point 3 that we need more information. And that this could be an effort between multiple parties with the board's opportunity to provide advice to that plan should be important, as well as the public. That last sentence in sub 1, it's also repeated elsewhere, to me is an important value that beyond the HAB, the general public should have an opportunity to weigh into. All right, there's a lot there, and I'd like to hear from, I know that the alternates are getting a perspective too, so Jeff and Tom might have something to say that's additional to what I just said.
Right. Jeff and Tom, which one of you wants to jump in first?
I suppose I will. To what Max was talking about with number 3, is it typical to request advice or to request information as part of advice? You know, I'd have to go back in the history and look. I think what touches me about this, and this was actually out of the conversation that we had with Steve and his belief that, hey, we all need to know more. I would argue that for number 3, it's not only the board that's asking for more information. I think we're pointing out that even the agencies need more information. That in order to make sure that the decision we're making is the right one, there are some ways that you can support and communicate that decision better. And it ties into what Tony Brooks was saying earlier, that, you know, we may not fully understand what all of the interrelated and trade-off risks are of acting versus not acting, which is why we included some requests for that kind of information as well. And we don't know which way that one's going to cut. We're just acknowledging that that's valuable information when you're making a difficult decision. So in short, I support the points as they stand, but I'm listening. Thanks.
Cecilia.
Yeah, I just real quick, I like the idea of giving the agencies time for their deliberation. David mentioned that he expected some response ready for the public by, you know, mid-February. What I would ask though is, if it gets to March and there hasn't been that announcement yet, are we going to wait more for the agencies, or are we going to try to put this advice out there to help them in their negotiations? So, you know, I don't want to delay this forever, but I think that waiting for timely response from the agencies might be fine.
Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board. Dan Solers?
Yes, thank you. I support all of the points. The number 5, the greater agility, I think, is extremely important. The whole thrust of this is to get in there, take a good hard look at the problem, and get ready to take care of this problem if it needs it, and be ready for future problems, which are definitely going to come up. There'll be no avoiding them. I think that we're approaching DOE and this advice with a level of subtlety that will not be reflected back in reviewing their previous responses to other advice we've made. I don't know if we need to be as sensitive as we're trying to be to DOE's need for clarity. I think it's pretty clear what we'd like to see happen. And while we can mince words, the intent is there, and I'm ready to go with it.
Right. Let's check in with our tribal representatives. Yakima Nation, Laureen, are you with us? Okay. Nez Perce, do we have anybody on from Nez Perce? Marissa?
Yes, I don't think there's one advice point that's more important than another. I think I think we've sort of made our position obvious over the last 2 years, and we've put out comment after comment after comment on leaking tanks. And I think to some extent, our values have been lost in this, and we're really going to have to take it back to the tribal level, or lost in the process of this.
Thank you, Marissa. Do we have anyone on from Umatilla? Right. Michael Mays, are you with us? I didn't hear anybody from Washington State, but I don't want to leave you out if you're with us and want to participate in the round robin.
Sorry about that. I had to check out for a minute. I'm listening. I'm learning. I'm find persuasive arguments on both sides of this. I'm for sending it back to the committee and having them hammer it out and deferring to their judgment. Thank you.
Right. Let's check in with our regional public health representatives. Is there anyone here from Physicians for Social Responsibility? PSR? How about the Benton Franklin Health District? Tony, are you still with us?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Dan is here also. I'm a biologist. Dan's more of a risk assessor. I think I'd like to have Dan go first, and then I'll flump a few at the end. Go ahead, Dan.
Hi. Thank you, Tony. I'm. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm not sure about the mic. Is there an easy way for me to share my screen quickly? I'm unfamiliar with Teams.
What would you like to share?
Okay, well, I will just read these into the record.
Oh, okay.
I think, first of all, these bullet points are hard to just get a handle on. So I created short titles for each of them. The short titles are: 1, timely assessment and response to SST leaks; 2, development of proactive abatement technologies; 3, information on abatement technologies; 4, development of a formal leak mitigation plan; 5, allocate budget for managing SST leaks; 6, improved SST monitoring; 7, involvement of ecology and other experts; 8, assessment and communication of cumulative SST impact. When I put all those like that, I'm in favor of all 8. So I would vote to support all 8. I would urge that we remove what I refer to as snarl language from it. And so I agree with Tony when he said he didn't think the word harm is appropriate in number 1. I completely agree. We have in radiation protection, we have a formal concept of expectation of harm from doses received today. But we're not even talking about doses received today. We're talking about doses in the future. So I would change the words abate the harm from to stop, minimize, or contain. So it would read action in number 1, action to stop, minimize, or contain the leak must not be delayed by lengthy processes. So this, and also the use of the word risk in many places is if you substitute the word probability or likelihood rather than risk, which has got a kind of a negative, and maybe not inappropriately negative, but I don't particularly like that. So one final thought. I'm not sure that we're letting the perfect become the enemy of the good by sending this back to the Tank Waste Committee. We might be letting the good be the enemy of the pretty good. But the idea that we should wait on this when there are tanks leaking, that's just wrong. We should do something now and say, hey, the time to do this is now. It isn't next March. So that's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My input, of course, is in number 1 that we already talked about. You want to go up and look at that one. On my screen, I start on number 3. Or can you move that screen around? I know I
Okay,
can.
which would you like?
Yeah, number one, I think that Dan's correction on the last sentence or the next to last sentence is a good one. I would accept that. I also kind of like the idea of getting as much information as we can before we move. And so I like Steve and Pam's approach. Number four, I think we've got lots of plans. I think we need some action. I think Steve was really right on that. These things shouldn't be plans, they should be action. Let's get people working and try to solve the problems rather than doing 4 more paper studies. I remember working at Pacific Northwest Lab when we did a paper study about 30 years ago that were just about exactly like what we're talking about now. However, I feel a little bit like the guy sitting on the fence say, go ahead, you can ride that bull, because I can't really add very much to this, but asking others to go ahead and do the work. But I think it would be nice to send it back to the board. Thank you.
Right. So moving on to our regional citizen, environmental, and public interest groups. Citizens for Clean Eastern Washington. Denise, are you with us?
I am here. Thanks for calling on me. I'd love to start with saying thank you to the issue management team, and please pat yourselves on the back for creating this. You've done a really great job, and as a new board member, I was really able to understand what you're trying to say and the background, and I really appreciate that. I don't have a problem with any of the 8 bullet points. I like the wording. I don't see a problem with talking about costs, and this is a big project, and we should have things in place and pin DOE down on things and make them spend more on community outreach and getting us the information we need to give good advice. I understand that we have processes, and that if this needs to be sent back to have a little more wordsmithing, I totally get that, so that everybody's happy. But I also I don't see a problem with making a statement to the agencies and not waiting for them to tell us what to think. Like, if we feel this way, then we should say, hey, here's how we feel, here's where we stand, like, what are you going to do about it? And put them on the spot to have to come up with something or to respond to us. And once again, thank you for creating this and making it easy for me to understand.
Washington League of Women Voters, Jan.
I've been really interested to hear everyone's voice, especially some of the new people. So it's kind of nice to kind of see that our group is bigger and has new names. So I haven't, I have not selected a bullet point that I like the best, but it's my opinion that the draft or the draft advice or the advice should say that we want to have the tank waste leaks mitigated. And so I hope that the rework can make that clearer if that's the consensus of the board, that we want them cleaned up. I can see maybe from the agency's point of view that if we're spending a lot of money for the waste treatment plant that is going to vitrify all this waste, that maybe we don't want to spend a lot of money, patching up the tanks that are leaking. But we all know that things take a long time to come to fruition. And so I think that it's important, as we find that the single shell tanks are leaking, that not only do we have a plan to mitigate it, but also that we do mitigate it. So anyway, my vote is, of course, to send it back to the committee and make the points clearer.
Right. Part of America Northwest. Amber, I think you're with us, right?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, I was able to listen in on the conversation yesterday, and I appreciated some of the conversation this morning too. I hope that we clarified as a group that the feasibility study hopefully will. I mean, the goal behind that would be to understand, right, the cost and the timing. That's the idea. So I, as you know, Jerry has been very clear that, you know, we support all 8 points. And I want to thank the issue management team, as well as Bob and the Tank Waste Committee, for all the work that's been put into this and the extra work. You know, we're definitely comfortable moving this forward. And I appreciated what Dan Strom had to say about the perfect being the enemy of the good. When I sat on Spokane City Council for 8 years, that's where I live in Spokane. My first city council president, who kind of trained me in, that was his favorite saying. And you know, I think we're very, very close here to, and it's really important as a region, as a board, that we make a statement on this. It's really important that we ask the agencies to really reflect on these leaks and make sure we have that they understand that as a region, this is a concern for all of us, and we need to have a plan moving forward. So yeah, that's our thoughts on it. I wanted to weigh in and say I support it, and Heart of America supports moving forward.
Thank you, Amber. Columbia Riverkeeper, Shelley?
There we go. Hi, Ruth. Thanks. Appreciate it. I'm not sure if Simone is on the call, but I'd like to give her an opportunity also if she was able to attend today. I missed a lot of the conversation on the first parts of the advice and came in a little late, right when Jan was speaking to the issue of wanting to send this back and do some rearranging. I support everything that's in this, what we see right now in these 8 bullets, but Ruth, if you could scroll to 3, to number 3 and number 5, there's the nugget. There's, for me, that's our value statement, that we want a mitigation plan for the system, and we want it now, as soon as possible, and we want agility to respond. Those are value statements, and I think that those, if we captured those 2 as the upfront and center and said, this is it, this is what we want. We want a mitigation plan, and we want agility. We want you to have the ability to abate these, abate these leaks. You know, the reality is, you know, we're held hostage to this idea that there's never enough money, that if we don't have, that if we take money away from the programs themselves, the building of the VIT plant, high level waste VIT plant, and then we take that money away, that's where it would come from in order to build some kind of plan like this. But then we never say, well, gee, what happens when it's all in the ground? And now we've got our beautiful shiny VIT plant, but we have nothing to process in it because it's all gone south into the Vados zone and into the river. We never talk about that. And physics tells us it's damned hard to retrieve it, really hard to retrieve it. So I guess what I would like to see is a value statement that encompasses 4 and 5, and then talk about what we don't know and what we'd like to understand. And of course, that's all the other bullets. And ask for DOE and the regulatory agencies to the questions that we would like to see answered on how we can address those values within 4 and 5 and get where we need to be so that we can, the public can see the ability to mitigate. That's my suggestion. And then line those other bullets up underneath that. Thank you.
Simone, are you with us on the phone? I don't see you listed in Teams, but I know we have a lot of folks on the phone. Okay, maybe not. Is anyone here from the Richland Rod and Gun Club? Jean or Paul? All right. Let's move to our employee seats, our workforce seats. Hanford Challenge. Liz?
Sorry, just took a minute to get off mute. I am on the issue manager team, so I'll be able to work through this. I'm a fan of simple, so I think we have a path forward, and I'm excited that we got to hear from so many people today. Thanks.
All right. Emmett Jackson, are you still with us?
Yes, thank you. I'm, listening to the arguments and discussions. I have a lot of faith in the IM team that put this together. I support that. My concern, my comment is that I don't know where the Yakimas or the Umatillas stand on this. We heard from the Nez Perce, but at this time, I think that I would support sending this through. And I appreciate all the work that's been done and the comments. Thank you.
All right. Jacob Reynolds, are you still with us?
If you can hear.
Hug that mic just a little bit more so we can
So
hear you.
I had an opportunity to complain about this in the Tank Waste Committee, and as did a lot of other people. And while there's some things I like better than others, I would rather it go as is today than some modification in March. But that being said, I sort of agree with Max's idea after having heard it that almost everything in here could be a subset of 4. Advice point 4, and if that would make it shorter and get more people to support it, I'm okay with that. I did, since I'm talking and probably no one will stop me, I want to point out, budgets. Some of this stuff is really cheap, and some of it could be quite expensive. I personally believe small budgets focus the mind, and I think Hanford budget is too big, and it's hard to manage. But we could get more done if our budget was just smaller. But more or less, I'm okay with it. I just want to get on with it. That's my spiel.
Thank you, Jacob. Hanford Atomic Metal Trades Council. Becky or Jeff? Central Washington Building Trades Council. Nicholas or Bob? Right. TriDeck. We had both Tom and David on for a while.
Tom's here. If David's on, I'll defer to him for the initial comments.
David, are you still with us?
Okay, he may have had to drop off. If he's here, he can certainly weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, I don't see him listed.
Okay. Well, I'd be happy to offer the comments that I have. I support the IM team in this effort. I think the advice is, while it's a little bit long in terms of the wording of the advice items themselves, I could support each one of those to go forward now. To me, I know there's some differences of opinion here, but if the negotiations between ecology and DOE are expected to proceed and conclude by mid-February, the earliest time we would get this advice back in front of the HAB would be March. And that would be after the fact, after the discussions with ecology and DOE, and therefore after the decisions between them have been made, presumably. I see a real advantage in getting our thoughts and our recommendations in front of both of those organizations prior to them formulating their own thoughts in hopes that it can inform that process for negotiations between ecology and DOE. But that doesn't look like it's going to happen now. And if this does not go through now, I would support sending this now. If it doesn't go through now and it has to come back to us in March, I would suggest reducing the wordiness of the advice items themselves. And in particular, if I chose the primary items for advice that I think are most important, would be number 2, 4, 5, and 6. But again, I support all of the activities. They all have a role. To me, 2, 4, 5, and 6 have the most impact for change. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our last chunk of seats are from local government interests, Grant and Franklin counties. Do we have Steve Anderson or Mike Karenko with us?
Yeah, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I've been sitting here for 2 days, not being a technology wizard, being frustrating, pressing the wrong buttons, but I could support this in any kind of word engineer version you come up with. So that's not the issue. The issue is we're thinking in these categories. As an example, I think it was mentioned that we don't want to be observed as patchwork for patchwork repair. But if we were infrastructure, we just heard a presentation where we're going to patchwork repair the water facility because it's not going to last. And yet the tank walls are actually infrastructure, and that's a different category in our mind. We're thinking it differently. But mostly I've been spending a lot of time returning back to the commercial sector, and you go back and you say, this is a great Hanford Think document. It's not a commercial think document. If it's commercial think, I would take number 4 and basically paraphrase it and said, you've been looking at this for 30 years. You have a lot of information. What is your current action plan? And then you can revise it based on more information, but what are the actions? And, part of my frustration is I don't know how many times the Hanford Advisory Board has recommended building extra double shell tanks in case it leaks. And that's an action. We recommended it. If we had been implemented, we'd have had these sitting right there to help with any kind of a link to mitigate it. So I would take 4 and say, your first draft should be due in a month. Like, based on what your current knowledge is, what are the list of actions that you think you can do and put in a thing? It's this no sense of urgency. We can be doing this, spending a lot of money for the next 5 years and not come up with any action. So somehow there's got to be a sense of urgency on number 4. What are the current list of actions that can be implemented? And then we can discuss them. So that's what's kind of bothering me a little bit. It's a great set of work. We should put it in, but I'd like to somehow inject something that's more action oriented, near term, not plan. And we've been thinking about this for a lot of years. It's not a new thought. There's always more that can be learned, and we should do that in a structured way. But if we also have to quantify the risk, and for example, to use facetious examples, somebody says, okay, I can stop the risk by just throwing grout in all those tanks, rotor-rooting it, risk is gone. Is that what you want? I mean, so you have to have a list, look at the end state, here's the list of potential actions, here's the consequences, rather than let's analyze this to death. And we have enough information on now to come up with a concrete list to debate it. And whether we spend the money or not depends on what's in it. But I personally don't think that high-level bid plan is going to be built. I think it'll slip 1 or 2 more decades. And so, based on past performance. So what do we have to do near-term action to prevent this liquid from leaking? And I think you captured it here, but I don't sense a commercial perspective on this sense of urgency, and I don't know how to inject that. I'll leave it to Bob and his team. So that's all I'll have to say. And I think Steve's here too. Hi, Steve.
Yeah, Steve Anderson. you have anything you want to add? Let's get you unmuted. What's going on here? I don't show you as muted. Oh, but we can't hear you. Huh. Okay.
Your computer may be muted, Steve.
I was going to say, I don't have him muted showing on my list.
Is your computer muted, and do you have that mute button on your 2 spaces past leave?
The same thing happened to me. Try clicking the microphone on and off a couple of times, and that's what worked to finally unmute me a little while ago.
Oh, this is frustrating. Okay. How,
Ruth, just give him the call-in phone number.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Really good idea. So why, let's go to the city of West Richland while we get Steve back online, and we'll come back to Steve Anderson, because I want to make sure we hear what he has to say, but we can work with his technical here in a minute. Richard Bloom, why don't you go, and we will, yeah.
I'll say it again, as I've said before. The key to this is we don't have any tools, and studying it, well, we can study it to death. Doing a risk assessment, all that will do is key up another bunch of lawsuits and fund a whole bunch of lawyers. I support. I support. I hear some background. Can you hear me, Ruth?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, there's somebody else in the background talking. I support items 2, which is look for technologies, develop technology to actually do something, and item 5 to actually go do it. They don't have any ability to address the leaks. Steve's comment about let's retrieve the tanks early. We have no place to put it if we retrieve it early. But we have technologies with Tisker, with Grout. I know that's a 4-letter word in some people's sense, but with Tisker and Grout, we could go to a single shell tank, suck out the 1,000 gallon that's in there, that's potentially going to leak before it leaks, because they all are going to leak before they ever get retrieved. I don't know how they're going to retrieve using the technology they're doing now if there are holes in the bottom of it. So the key comes down to is we don't have any tools. We all agree we need to dig a hole, but we're trying to figure out where we're going to dig the hole, how many holes we want to dig, but we don't own a shovel. So where are we going? So that's why I stress items 2 and 5. Those are things that we should be expecting. Have them develop the ability to address the liquid that's in the single shell tanks. Thank you.
Steve Anderson, did we get you back online? Josh put the phone call in line in the chat as well. So we will continue to check back with you so we can hear what's on your mind. While we're trying to unmute yourself on the phone. Pardon?
I was noting *6 to unmute yourself on the phone. I see that they're all muted at the moment.
Okay, *6. Thank you. City of Richland. Bob Thompson, Vince Pinesco, are you with us?
I am.
So,
right.
Bob, I think it should go back to the committee. The ones that I agree with are 2 and 5. I'll echo Mr. Bloom's comments. You know, sometimes there's majority and minority opinions on these kind of things, but that has a tendency to water down anybody's advice, frankly. And I'd like to think that we might be able to go back to the committee with the comments that have been generated today to try to, you know, first off, maybe shorten the advice, because I know when advice goes back to DC or to EM and it goes on and on and on a while, it's kind of hard to pass that message. And, you know, again, part of the audience just isn't EM and DOE, but our congressional and senatorial staffs. And so remember that they are instrumental in creating budgets and assisting on this project. And so I think when we create messages, whether you call it advice or a bullet point to try to galvanize support for projects, it is important to understand that your audience is far broader than just EM. I know what our mandate is, but trust me, our advice carries some weight within the congressional delegations. I guess that's my comments.
Thank you. Vince Pinesco?
Yeah, I'd back up just what Bob said in terms of the impact on the congressional delegation. And that's where a couple points. Over the last several years, we've complained that the HAB has not been able to get its comments into DOE plans. They issue the plan and we get it and it's too late. It's done. It's an issued document. Here we have an opportunity to, as a previous commenter made, that we can get our comments via this advice to DOE and EPA, and ecology, while they're doing their negotiations. So we have an opportunity here to get our oar in the water. So I would, you know, with that concept of trying to be supportive of ecology, and it's good to hear that ecology is already thinking about some of the issues we've raised. So to moving forward is a good idea with the changes that you've talked about, making it maybe clearer. I'm not too worried about the budget aspect because this isn't just advice, it's a suggestion. This advice could sit and do nothing for a year or two. And what the action is going to come from is when ecology puts the hammer down on DOE. That's where the action is going to, and DOE is going to have to make adjustments in its budget, and how that adjustment occurs, we don't know. But it's important, just one last thought. Over the years, and this gets back to what Bob just said, the congressional delegation gets moved when people start complaining. And DOE has seen this over the years when there were various groups that would complain about something or other and have groups and gatherings and groundswell of activity. The congressional people notice that and work on budgets. If you want the Hanford budget to be massaged where it should have a contingency for future tank leaks, then this is a step, maybe just the first step from our board in the right direction to get this issued. And it'll send a message, and we need to send additional messages to our congressional delegation via these advice that, hey, this is an important area and we need a contingency fund. We can't be strapped. Well, if we know tanks are going to leak, you've got to have funds in there to respond to it. And so I think, yeah, that's as much as I would like to input at this time. Thank you.
Right. City of Pasco, Rob?
Yes, hi. I think the most important thing is to get the message out now in advance, that we're displeased and we really need to see these plans. On the other hand, I think that maybe this advice could be repeated again in another 6 months with some more concrete, advice based upon their plan. So like I said, I think the most important thing is we get it out now, and get our position, so people recognize it. Yes, it is a long document, but maybe they'll think it's a bigger problem that way. I don't know what they'll think in Washington, but let's get it done.
City of Kennewick, do we have either John or William with us? Benton Franklin Council of Governments, Bill or Aaron, are you with us? Right. Benton County, we've got both Bob and Pam. Which one of you would like to go first?
I'll let Pam go first since I'm tank waste, and I'll try to wrap it up.
Pam.
Thank you. I'm sorry about my phone being on speaker when I received a call from a new HAB member. I'm pretty passionate about this, and I expressed that passion to the issue manager team as this was starting out along with David Riekelag. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm retired, but for 25 years, I was executive director of the Hanford Communities. And it was my task to go back to DC a couple times a year and meet with congressional staff and committee staff. And an example I'll give you is a concern that we've had for a really long time was the 324 building and the capsules in the cesium and strontium capsules. And we could not convince our own congressional staff that those were risk priorities and needed to be funded. And they had wanted other priorities like PFP to be done before they moved on to other projects. So as good and right as this issue is, we need to approach it on a step-by-step basis, realistically, both in terms of congressional funding and in terms of what we're asking the Department of Energy to do, because their staffing is limited and we're asking for a hell of a lot in this piece of legislation. So I agree with several people. I agree with Max, who I haven't met yet, about the priority of number 4. That makes such fundamental sense. And then secondly, in item 5, the TPA agency should advocate for additional investment by DOE in technology development focused on rapid mobile retrieval of leaking tanks. So Shelley and I have been an advocate for 20 years that DOE needs to invest in technology because technology gets work done in a more efficient manner, and they have not invested nationally or locally in technology that's needed. Anyway, I do want to hear from Ecology. It sounds like they're willing to come to us pretty soon, even if they haven't completed their negotiations. I think it would inform our comments. This needs to be more succinct, as many people have said. It is an important issue, but it is not immediately important. It's gone on for a long time, and we need to get on with it. So that's where I'm coming from, and I hope to continue working with the issue manager team. I'm sorry, as a retired person, I've actually gotten to take a couple vacations recently, and I've been out of the loop, and so I realized my lack of participation means my voice was not heard until today. So thank you very much, issue manager team. I think we can make this compelling and succinct and get the attention that we need. Thank you very much.
Right. Bob, before I give it to you, I want to check and see if Steve Anderson was able to phone in. It looks like he's having some internet problems, and I wanted to make sure we gave every opportunity to hear his voice as well. Steve, are you with us, or did we manage to lose you? Ouch. Darn. Okay, Steve, if you can hear us, feel free to send Bob and I an email with your comments so that they at least hear from you. I feel really bad. We're going to hear from Bob, and then we're going to go to public comment.
Okay, wrapping it up. I appreciate all the input, but the feeling I got is, as it stands right now, the advice would be blocked probably by several members. There were several members that thought we ought to take action now, but I think what I heard is we're going to take it back to the issue manager team, take it back to the Tank Waste Committee with the goal of getting it back to the board in March. And I did hear that shorter is better, less is more. I think it was said several times. And that advice points 2 and 5 were the key ones that we should focus on, along with 4 and 3. And so we'll look to see if we can combine some of the others into the 2 and 5. And once again, good input. And if you want to join our IM team, just send Jeff Burbright or me your email address. And when we put out the request for a meeting date, we'll send you the message. So is there any more? Jeff, you're issue manager. Is there something else we need to add?
No, Bob, I think we can carry on.
Thank you.
So one of the quirks was we had a couple of versions of this agenda. One had public comment at 11:45, and the one we're working off of has public comment at noon. So I want to ask right now, I don't have any emails asking to provide public comment. If you are with us and you want to provide public comment, we would welcome your thoughts. Is there anyone who would like to make public comment? And just to cover our bases, I'm going to ask again at noon in case the agenda change caused any unintentional confusion. So the last piece of the agenda had to do with the upcoming March meeting. We did talk about that a little bit at the front end of this morning's meeting. Steve Wigman, is there anything else we need to cover for board business to tie up loose ends?
Not that comes to my mind right now.
Okay, Gary Younger, what's on your mind?
Yes, I just got word of just a little bit ago that headquarters is asking for, DOE headquarters in Washington is asking for a meeting with the HAB for about 2, maybe 3 hours on January 18th. I apologize that this is just coming in, but I didn't have an opportunity to share with anybody. Don't have the topic available, but headquarters is requesting Tuesday, January 18th, and recognize that we want to try to get maximum HAB participation here. So would you like a morning, an afternoon, or an early evening meeting?
So Gary, this is Jan. I think we need to keep in mind there's a 3-hour time difference when we suggest early evening for us.
Chris Sutton.
Doesn't make any difference to me what time.
Wigman.
Yeah, I always prefer morning, but I think that it's important that we make sure we can time it so that those who are still gainfully employed can be available.
Would it be a possibility to do over an extended lunch hour for us to help those who have other day commitments? Richard Bloom, what's on your mind?
I just wanted to point out Tuesday is when most of the cities have actually city council meetings. So ensure that it's early enough in our day so that we don't hit the 4 o'clock time period. The overall aspect of it.
Oh, thank you for that insight. I've got Dan Solitz, Tom Cecilia, and Mike Karenko in queue. Dan?
Yeah, I'm looking at my calendar. Tuesday, we have an Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board meeting that gets out sometime around 2:30, I think. Hang on a second. Yeah, 8 o'clock to 2:15 on Tuesday. We have an Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board meeting.
Okay. Tom Cecilia, what am I betting that you're going to say the same thing?
It was the same thing, and I just wanted to point out that we will have DOE presenting there, so we don't want to have a conflict on their schedule either.
Mike?
Yeah, I just, not on schedule, but from standpoint, I think it's very important we find out what the topic is. You know, last couple of times I remember DOE headquarters coming in as something about why is the Hanford Board exist? And the second one was let's replace everything with risk approach, which would have been really tough for our funding. So it's important that I think we understand the topic and then maybe through the leadership, at least come up with a structured way to have our position on whatever topic they're going to present, rather than getting it cold. So I don't know if there's a way to find out what, you know, maybe they just want to listen to what our priorities are. I'm not sure, but it'd be, I'm a little bit nervous that we have no idea what they're going to be presenting.
Well, I can attest that we didn't know about this request until the middle of this morning. So
I know.
It really is breaking news. Jerry.
Well, I'm just saying we can still prepare for it when we do find out what it is. I mean, not to be confrontational, but.
Will the meeting be recorded?
That is our habit. I don't know. I mean, it literally came in within the last 90 minutes. So it's.
Well, if it's recorded, then people that aren't available or for all of it can catch up to it.
I have a question.
Okay, I've got Jerry in queue and Jan in queue. So let's do that.
Thank you,
Jerry?
because I need to be in a meeting with the Speaker of the House and others at noon. So thanks. Given that it's in the middle of legislative session and schedule is tight, I think having an early evening or lunch hour meeting is important for people to participate. And especially given just it's not a lot of time to plan and remove stuff from schedules for people. And so lunch or early evening for us. And it would be important to know what the topics are and what input they are seeking or what they want to share. Be really important. But so I need to leave, but thank you and appreciate that you called on me there so I can jump off.
Dan.
So I guess I have a couple of questions I'm directing to Gary. Since this has come in just recently, you know, like what office is asking to meet with us? Is this, you know, EM? Is this an SSAB thing? Have other regional advisory boards? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, I'm getting some feedback. Okay, so have other regional advisory boards, do you know of that have had this request? And maybe Steve knows the answer to that, or Shelley. I think right now we're just looking for information about what this could be. You know, DEI is a very important topic these days on the headquarters level. And just curious if what you can piece together from where the message originated from and so on.
Yeah, just by coincidence, we just received a message from DOE headquarters about the definition of low activity waste.
Oh.
So maybe that's a coincidence, maybe that's a subject.
To answer Jan's question, I don't have the topic of this meeting available. However, I'm looking at the address line on this request. It's mainly headquarters DOE folks that are on here.
I have Pam in queue. Pam?
I think noon makes the most sense, given the situation, because that's 3 o'clock their time. But we do need to know what the topic is. Thank you.
So it kind of sounds like from the conversation that the 18th is probably not as good a day as headquarters is requesting. So do you want me to ask for a different day, or do we want to just go with as many people as we can get on the 18th? And it's also sounding like possibly, since headquarters folks are involved, maybe a meeting starting at 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., recognizing that it's not convenient for some, but is convenient for others. Give me some thoughts here, please.
Can you remind us how much time were they requesting? Was that specified? I can't remember.
2 hours with the potential of going different, going longer.
Gary, I think we're all talking noon, not 1 o'clock.
And I can even move it to noon. Like I said, I'm looking for some consensus advice here, or majority advice.
Esteban, you've got your hand up. What's up?
Well, I think everybody's been talking about the urgency and us trying to get ahead of it, of stuff to communicate with DOE, college, and everything. So it's here. It's on a silver platter. So people, please take advantage of it, because at the rate we're going and with everything happening, you know, these opportunities don't come so often. So please, I mean, you know, just be, you know, aware that this is happening, needs to happen. And I mean, all the great work all of you've been doing, and thank you for everything. But, you know, please, you know, let Gary know and everybody that, you know, that we can't, you know, pass up on this opportunity and voice our concerns and our comments on this.
Okay, Emmett, I'm going to ask you just to hold for 1 minute. I want to check, is there anybody who has joined us who wants to make public comment? Anyone who wants to make public comment? Okay, I wanted to make sure we did our due diligence. Emmett, what's on your mind?
Suggestion would be 11 to 1.
11 to 1 is a suggestion. Cecilia.
I think if Gary, if you're willing to see what the flexibility is from the headquarters folks, and maybe do a doodle poll and try to figure out if there's a time that works for the majority or everybody. might be worth thinking about. Also, the EIC needs to schedule a call once we find out what the topic is.
This is Shelley. I would say we're never going to find a time when everyone can be on it. There's too many of us. This is full board. It's not just EIC. The week gets harder as the days fill up for everyone as we move further into the week. I guess if we want to take a shot, is the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board meeting on Monday? It's Tuesday, second day for you guys?
No, Monday is a holiday.
Oh, Monday's a holiday.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
there you
ML King is that Monday.
That's okay.
Yeah, we can make the OHCB board meeting work. We can work around it. Just if there's an opportunity for more engagement, I know Jerry was saying he couldn't make a afternoon meeting, and trying to get people who have day jobs to be able to attend too. Just it's worth an ask.
Okay.
Well, I'm in Stebbins camp. We, take the call, take the meeting.
Gary, we also need to find out if we can record the meeting. I mean, our habit is just to do it, but I don't know if that's if headquarters would have an opinion about that.
It would be a public meeting, and one of the things that I also have to do is file a Federal Register notice of the meeting. So it's not where we just go to a coffee shop and chat. So public meeting rules will apply, which means we will be recording the meeting.
Okay. Let me know if you need me in Richland that day or not. I can juggle my schedule. Jan, bring your own cafe. Yes.
Yeah.
Jan.
Bring our own cookies to share. I agree that maybe 11 to 1 would be really good, or 12 to 2. I think that that would maximize the number of people from our area who could attend while still respecting the fact that it's part of the workday in DC. So yeah, and I agree with Shelley that earlier in the week is better than later in the week. So I'm all for the date and an early time.
Steve Wigman.
Yeah, I just want to let you know I can make myself available, and my schedule shouldn't be a consideration. I have the question of will we know in advance what the topic is? And surely somebody already knows what the topic is because they scheduled the meeting. And are we in a position where we're supposed to provide something in that meeting? The sooner we know that, the better.
I will share what I can as soon as I can, because you have valid points there that should be respected. I agree, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, you know my adage, if you don't have a purpose for a meeting, you shouldn't have a meeting.
Duh.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's sounding like that the board is agreeing to the 18th with the request of 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. local time. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, just local time, Pacific time. We just really need to make that clear.
Got it. I will take that back to headquarters. We will firm it up. We'll get the Federal Registered notice, and we will, and I'll work with Ruth to get appropriate notification out.
We do not. The last weekly update you're going to get for this calendar year will be today. Josh is working on that. We're not doing those, had not planned on doing those the last 2 weeks of December. So the notice will come out probably in some other form as well as the weekly update the first week of January. Chris Sutton.
Yeah, Gary, just one last thing too. Find out from DOE if they're going to set up the virtual meeting on a platform like Teams or some other, or whether Ruth is supposed to do it, because with all the problems people have at any given time with chat or getting on, it would be, we don't want to have a meeting with DOE and find out that half the people, for whatever reason, can't get online and talk.
The other thing, thank you, Chris. The other thing is, if I've got the notice, I might be able to get our tech people to augment the current staff and help, be available to help for that too.
Yeah, I'll work on the logistics. Historically, if headquarters sets it up, it will be on Zoom Gov. If we are asked to set it up, of course, we will be using Teams. But good point, Chris. I will ask the question.
Oh, gosh, the question I have is, who's facilitating the meeting? Jan, go.
So when does the Federal Register have to be submitted? Is that 1 month in advance or 2 weeks in advance? What?
I have the draft on my desktop pending your approval, and I have to get that in today.
Oh, so does the Federal Register say what the topic is?
No, it says board business.
Board business. Okay, thank you.
So
Gary, please keep Steve and I in the loop. Really would appreciate it.
Will do.
Actually, then we can put the placeholder day in this week's weekly update. So at least the day is flagged. Josh and I will get on that this afternoon.
Hmm.
All right. Is there anything else we need to cover? Got any more surprises up your sleeve, Gary?
I'm surprised I had this surprise.
Yeah. Well, the email and text during meetings are always entertaining. Steve Wigman, why don't you close us out?
Okay. I guess, this has been a challenging year for all of us, and now we get to anticipate how our new year is going to begin without having a clue how it's going to begin. I just appreciate everybody's efforts to maximize what we could accomplish during this challenging year that is now ending. And as it's my first year as board chairman, I certainly appreciate all the things that Susan Leckban was much more effective at accomplishing than I have been. But I appreciate the support that I've gotten, and appreciate everybody for continuing to participate in such an ambiguous process. I believe that HAB is a very important part of the process and will be for a long time. And we want to keep ourselves in a position where we know as much as we can know as we face the issues that are certainly not becoming fewer. So take a deep breath and enjoy the holidays.
Pam, I see your hand.
Yes. So I have had a lot of frustration with this process and my ability to participate. And so I sent an email to Carrie Meyer to say, hey, is there any chance we're going to get to have meetings in person? And I got a response back that they're looking at resuming in-person meetings in the spring. So obviously they've got a lot to do to make that work. But anyway, I just think that's really good news, because I think we function collaboratively when we have a chance to work together. Thank you.
Right. And Gary and I actually talked this morning about a possible dry run to practice doing hybrid meetings in the next couple of months. So that conversation is ongoing as we try to figure out how to make this work better. Steve, I think we're adjourned. What do you think?
Yes, I really appreciate all the conversation that we've had the last couple of days. I know it's a challenging topic that we've dealt with, and I know I took a pretty strong position, and I hope that wasn't too disruptive, but I have to call it as I see it. Thank you all very much.
All right.
Adios.